And here we go. I'm trying to do this. Okay. Just like, you can't see it. I'm just a giant head right now in this live stream. Okay. First of all, a couple things on the exam. Don't panic. That's all I need to say about the exam. Maybe some of you did panic a little bit. Don't panic. Okay, great. If you look at if you can hop onto Blackboard right now, if you can do that, you'll see I curved the exam. So a couple of things. We went through a lot of, well, not a lot, but some of the, I thought, more difficult questions or some of the stranger questions. I think I will give you guys credit for the question about the rats because I phrased it poorly. Most of you answered it was a direct incentive and it was a perverse incentive, but actually it is a direct incentive and a perverse incentive. So I need to give you credit for that because of my incompetence in asking you a question. What I was getting at was the end result was a perverse incentive. The rat tails, remember that story? But you could argue, yeah, but it's a direct incentive. You're getting paid money for a tail. So it's true. So I need to go back and fix that as a 1 point variation, but it's not going to really matter too much. If you look at the curve, you'll see that some of you, your grade might have shifted a little bit, and some it might have shifted a lot of it. And how this works is it's in general the very same thing. Well, I'll just draw it, but like I said, I always get nervous drawing on the board when I don't have the right marker. When we talk about the production possibilities frontier, remember with the pizza and all that stuff, and it curves like this? Well, it's the same thing with the curve of the grade. So like I said the first day, everything in this class is real. It's the real world. So the way I curve the grade is with a multiplier effect. So if you got a 10 on the exam out of 100 questions, nobody got a 10, but you got a 10, you are down here at the bottom of the curve. So you have more benefit on the curve than if you got like a 98. 98 might get you a 98.1. A 10 might get you 30 points or 40 points. Just how the curve is. I can go through the math if you like, but in general terms, the lower you are, the more benefit you get off of the curve, because you could have had a bad day or something, but the higher you are, the less benefit. But if you're getting a 98, you're doing pretty great. If you're getting a 10, you still are in trouble, but at least it's not as bad trouble. So you have a fighting chance. That's the whole point of a curve. And I reserve the right completely to not curve later on. Let me, I need to share. Whoops. Hold on. I need to share stuff on the live stream. That's us. You might recognize me. Yeah, it's because dumb. And I'm completely incompetent on a Windows computer. But I'll just cheat. I will not cheat. Click the screen icon in your address bar. Okay. I hope that works. Any questions on the curve? I think this is the point you're supposed to like throw chocolate at me or flowers and say thank you. And we wash your car, whatever it is. No?
I was thinking, I just can say, I appreciate you like this. You jumped a little bit, so I mean,
Good.
I'm happy.
I do have a dirty car. So no, good. So really, okay. In this class, which could be a class of carving your eyes out with a fork, I understand that. I'm trying to mitigate disaster. So there's a lot of inquisitive work. So if you miss some, okay. You have 4 exams. If you tank some exams, I'm going to curve for the most part, depending on how the whole class does. If everyone in the class got 95s, I'm not going to curve the exam. If everyone in the class gets 10s, I have done something terribly wrong. So all that said, I'm going to drop one of the exams as well. That is not reflected in your Blackboard grade right now. Because if I have Blackboard drop your lowest test, then I don't care. I'll do it automatically. But if it drops your lowest exam score, you will always be looking at an artificial grade in Blackboard until the last exam. And it's pretty easy math. Let's say that you got a 50, 100, and 100 on 3 tests. And you're trying to figure out, should I take the last test or should I not? If I drop a test before the last test, your grade is 250. I average that. So and you will not be able to make a rational decision on whether to take the last test or you should really study hard for it. So what I do instead is your gradebook does not reflect that drop until the day after the last exam. That means that you walking into the last exam will know 100% your exam score grade before you can choose whether to take the last one or not take it. So let's say that you've gotten 85s all the way across the board. Time for the last exam comes up, you think, okay, I can take it and try to get 100, or I can take it and more than likely get an 85 because I'm right on 85s. So if you get an 85 and I drop the lowest exam score, it's going to drop one of those 4. It doesn't matter, they're all 85s. So you can't make a rational decision about whether you should just not study that last week and pay attention to other classes, your opportunity cost. You guys can follow me on this? Mm-hmm. So what I do is to give you the best way you can judge your opportunity cost for if you're taking other classes or if you're working or doing other stuff, is I don't drop out till right after the last test. Then you'll know exactly what your points will be. Otherwise, it's kind of, you won't know, and some people might be on the bubble between like a B and a C or a D and an F or whatever, and it'll be a surprise. So I try not to any surprises in here. Okay, good? We can do all the math on the board if you like, but that's when at 9:15 in the morning, I'll lose everybody. So, all right, I hear a beep, so let's, I'm trying to, you know what, let me do this to keep up with our live stream. Oh my gosh. I will keep up with our live stream in just 1 second. All right, so since we had a holiday Monday and we have to cover a lot of stuff this week, I'm going to opt to not cover a lot of stuff this week, and I'm really going to focus on this chapter because this is a fundamental, basic chapter. The other chapters are a little technical on some stuff, and we could talk through them. I think the best method is Monday, come with some questions when you're doing your reading. But we're going to have to blow through things pretty quickly. But this is so important to your total understanding of the economy. I don't want to go fast through this. I'll rip off chapters 7 and 8 so we can really focus on chapter 6. But your job is to bring questions Monday week, and I can answer them for you if you're reading and you're confused. All right, so far we have gone through the basics of economics. We've talked about some taxation, some price ceilings, that business. But this is the real core of macro. So we talked about how people allocate resources and what isn't and what is, and how we kind of base our decisions on some rational thinking. So we've also talked about macro versus micro. We've talked about this and what the difference is. All right. So just real quick, in micro, we look at the behavior of people. In macro, we look at the entire economy. And I'll give you a perfect example that's going on right now in politics. And you guys have heard of House Bill 8? So this is a safe class. This is a class of inquiry. It's a college class. Speak your mind if you'd like. There's no judgment except for me. I judge everything. And if you don't agree with me, you obviously are wrong. So no, haha. Tell that to my wife. Actually, tell it to my kids. Anyway, perfect example of the difference in microeconomics and macro. So House Bill 8 is the bill that gives an incentive to people, a $10,000 bounty to sue people going to find abortion services or something like that. The technical language is aiding and abetting. It actually comes from the Fugitive Slave Act, where the state legislature did the same thing, gave people bounties to turn in people who are fugitive slaves. So it's a history, it's a long, terrible history in the state. The point that I want to make here is on economics. The macroeconomic consideration is companies are now saying, we're going to boycott Texas. We're not going to go to Texas. Forget Texas, you bunch of losers, that kind of thing. Okay, so from a macroeconomic standpoint, Texas as an economy, we evaluate that. We say, well, what does that do to the Texas GDP? Let's say Tesla decides to pull out of Texas, or Apple, or other companies. What does it do in general terms to GDP for Texas? Based on a political decision. This happened in Georgia a while ago when a lot of sports teams refused to play in Georgia because of voting rights stuff. Okay. We can get into House Bill 8 if you want. Politics and economics tie very closely together. And if you don't, we don't have to do it either. But from a macroeconomic standpoint, that's how we evaluate it based on gross domestic product. And we're going to define GDP in a second. Now, from a microeconomic standpoint, Lyft, hold on, let me get this. It's very difficult for me to do more than one thing at a time, obviously. So Lyft has said in the legislation, hold on. Well, I think our stream is. Well, it looks like I'm not sharing the screen, so I'll try to link it with my work. Well, I'll fix that in a second. So, what Lyft has said in the legislation says if you're aiding and abetting somebody doing an activity, in this case, abortion services, then you could be sued, including someone driving somebody to a clinic. So if you are in a car and Lyft, then technically somebody anywhere, in Texas or out of Texas, can sue the Lyft driver for taking somebody to a clinic, even though the Lyft driver doesn't know where they're going. So it's a disincentive for Lyft they have their drivers driving people because they don't know what's going on. So from a microeconomic standpoint, Lyft has to evaluate how much money do we put into an insurance fund to support our drivers who might be sued just doing their job, but they don't know what they're doing or where they're going. Because it's not the Lyft driver to ask the passenger, where are you going or why are you doing it? Have you taken an Uber or Lyft before?
Well, they have to know where you're going.
The location, but they don't say, oh, like you said, take me to McDonald's. They say, oh, you get a Big Mac? Boy, you don't really need it. They don't say that. So they might say, okay, I'll take you to Big Mac. Or if somebody says, take me to a clinic, but they don't say the clinic, they say, take me to this place, and the clinic is down the street, you could still be technically aiding and abetting. So Lyft is in trouble, and they said, well, we're going to put money into an account to prevent our drivers from being sued personally under the state law. So that's a microeconomic analysis of what a company has to do for the law versus a macroeconomic analysis of what we look at on gross domestic product, how the law affects it. So that's a really good example of what's happening today. And I'm not kidding, Lyft is doing this. They're putting money into a lawsuit fund. Because if you're a driver for Lyft or Uber, you're a contractor. So what do? If you get served by 10 people, say, and they say, hey, we're suing you because you aided and abetted whoever, and you get summoned, and you get served for it in a civil suit, and you're looking at $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, and you're saying, I'm just driving people, I know what I'm doing. So that is a microeconomic. So you guys get the difference in the real world problem with this. Okay.
Isn't that already a medical privacy issue? Because in order to log into Lyft, you have to put your name and how old you are in order to get a driver. So that combination of information already coupled with you going to get any kind of medical is against privacy laws, isn't it?
So you're saying that you putting in information to Uber and then they take you to the hospital could be a violation of HIPAA?
Yeah.
So you have complete right to, HIPAA only protects doctors from using your private information. But if I told you right now in class, boy, I got to go to the doctor because I think I have the measles, I can do that. It's not waiving, you can just say whatever you like to anybody. It's your right.
So they can use your information to sue you, though. That's why it's
Not Lyft and Uber. It's other people. The state law says if let's say that you're an Uber driver, and let's say you are going to a clinic, and you say, I see you're taking her to a clinic, you can sue him for aiding her to go to the clinic, even though he's just an Uber driver. And he says, I don't know, I'm just doing my job. That's what I mean by the microeconomic valuation. Because the company, what I'm getting at is, like I said, we talk about politics all day long, but to me, the economics of it is the company has to prepare for that in their marginal rate of expenditure by putting money into an account to prevent the lawsuit that happens to their contractor. So it's not the Uber driver trying to figure out where you're going. It's some guy who's a neighbor looking for the bounty. That's what the state law does. So that's why companies have to put money into they have to figure out their expenditure in a microeconomic standpoint versus what we would talk about in this particular class is how does that affect a big company hitting the gross domestic product of Texas? And does it decline because of that? That's the difference. Okay. I'm trying to share this thing, and it is not.
allow them to see your screen?
Yeah. So the trick is it's not sharing it though. So I can allow it. But okay. Let me. You guys don't pay tuition to see some chimpanzee up here clicking around on buttons. That drives me a little crazy. Oh, wait, who just helped me with that? Who said click the button? Because that was the right solution. because I think I have it working. I'm checking the stream. And anyway, okay, let's get your money's worth. Let's keep moving. All right, so one, I wanted to make that distinction because one, it's applicable to what's going on today, and companies are really struggling with this. If you're a company, you would struggle with it too, because you want to abide by the law, but you don't want your people to get sued. But if your people get sued and they're contractors, what happens to your company in Texas? It what? Yeah, you kind of stop. You people will quit. So if you have contractors and they're saying, I might get sued for doing my job and I don't know what's going on, you probably will just quit your job. You don't want to be on the hook for that. So a company has to make this analysis. That's the point.
That they don't use employees.
Well, there's another deeper issue in this, which is what is an employee versus what's a contractor. And Uber and Lyft both, since they're based in California, there was a big proposition that went to the public vote saying our employees are contractors, not employees. They don't have to have benefits. And that passed. I can't remember what the name of the proposition was. But they put a lot of money to make sure it passed. Now it's in the courts to see if that's really going to stick. So,
What do you think about that?
what do I think about it? I think when you make a promise to people that's your core fundamental part of your company, that's your product, they're employees of the company. You can't have a company that's driven completely by contractors. Otherwise, you don't have the company, you're just a shell company. And I'll tell you about shell companies because I did deal with these. And a shell company is a corporation, a structure you set up to hide, but you put other structures inside of it. And I was in a meeting one time in Los Angeles, and there's a bunch of guys, they're old, the same old kind of thing, right? A bunch of old guys sitting around saying, we're going to set up the shell company and this and this and this and this, all this kind of business. And finally I said, well, what are we making? I said, well, that's up to you to figure out. So it's like 15 guys, they're older guys. And then this one guy said, hey, I'm going to end up ripping you off anyway, because that's what I do when I run companies. I said, that's awesome. So I said, I'm done. So I called the cab. This is before Uber. And I called the cab and got out of there. So it's my philosophy on that is if you're going to have a company, you pay people your livable wages to grow the company. Now, livable wage is a whole microeconomic issue too. We study this. We go into that. How does you work at McDonald's, and for the most part, it's a non-livable wage, for the most part, in certain different places. In Oregon and in Washington, maybe, but Texas, maybe not.
Especially New York.
Yeah, well, so the minimum wage, we could talk about what minimum wage does too on a lot of things. And is minimum wage an incentive, and what does it do on price differentiation and pushing down costs? But difficult because we have a certain expectation of cheap stuff when we go buy it. This is why there's a big trade imbalance between China and the United States. That's what we want. We want cheap. And so what cheap means is it's pressure on, it's wage pressure to push wages down so we can build things cheaper or things go overseas. And that's why all this stuff happens. We'll talk through a lot of those issues too. But first we need to have our definitions. So here, GDP. And is this a thing that I can go? Okay. So GDP is how we measure what output of a nation is. Now, I mentioned a minute ago Texas GDP. So it's not just a nation, it can be a state, it could be a city. So Amarillo has a GDP. In the past 4 years, Amarillo's GDP has declined relative to Lubbock, which means our output and income of Amarillo have declined versus what Lubbock has. Lubbock, I'm picking as the next comparable city. And I call this the Cheesecake Factory problem. Why does Lubbock have a cheesecake factory and we don't? Well, because they can support it because their GDP is increasing and ours is decreasing. And there are many reasons for that. We can talk about those reasons later. So it's the total of everything in an economy. But that's not exactly fair. And we're going to talk about what that total is and isn't. And that's the whole point of why I want to spend time talking about this stuff today. So the value of all final goods and services. So final goods just means the end result. And I'll show you an example here of what that means and the difference. Okay, so we use GDP to measure how well we're living, how our growth is doing, our economic growth, and whether we're in a recession or an expansion. And this is called the business cycle that we'll talk about here in a second. So GDP, it gives us a number that we can look at to estimate standards across where we are today and where we've come from and where specifically we are in the world. So we can compare the US GDP to China, the US GDP to Rwanda, the US GDP to Mexico in 2018, in 2020, and 2021. And from that basis, and we'll talk a little bit about the math coming up, is how we measure growth. Doesn't take into account population size, doesn't matter because it's per capita. And per capita means per person on average. We'll take a look at that here. So that's why we can say the GDP of Switzerland and the GDP of the United States, even though the populations are vastly different, we can bring it to one number. And that tells us where the growth is or where the opportunity is. Okay, so it looks like this. GDP per capita is the GDP, and we'll talk about the calculation of this divided by the population, and that is per capita or per person. And that's the average living standard per person of a nation. So here's a good example. China, the GDP of China in billions of dollars, and then per capita. So we have this, the same division. So the GDP, 11 billion in billions of dollars. So we have $11 trillion and $3 trillion in Germany. But per capita GDP, this is how much, basically, you can say in general terms, that's how much money somebody makes a year in general. That's the value in general terms. So you might say in average, $42,000 in Germany versus $8,000 in China, even though the total GDP numbers are quite different. This accounts for population size. That's why per capita is the important number. Because instantly we say, well, China's huge compared to Germany, but Germany has more wealth for their citizens than China does at this point. Now, the upper middle class in China is growing at a tremendous rate versus the middle class in China. But China still has huge problems, the lower end, because what happened is, and the reason why this number is so diverse is because people came from rural areas into the urban areas, especially youth, to work, and they send that money back to rural areas. So, has anyone been to China in here? So, it's interesting. They made an entire decision 30 years ago to change how the economy works in China, and they're pretty close. I think the United States, maybe the Eurozone, and then China, but China, I think, second largest economy, pretty close to being the first largest economy based on their exports.
Does that number account for after taxes or before taxes?
No tax
No tax.
consideration, right? It's just in general gross GDP.
I was asking because I knew Germany had a really high tax rate until recently because they just paid off their World War II debts.
Yeah,
So
right.
I thought the number would have been a lot lower.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't, in general terms, GDP, so I think my better answer to this will be coming up on we haven't talked about what the components of GDP are yet. Once you see those components, then you'll start to say, that's why taxation is included in it. That's an excellent question, though. And an excellent point about the war debt and the reparations debt that Germany had to pay.
How often is it measured, the GDP?
We can measure by month, by quarter, by year. Usually we look at on total domestic GDP, we look at it at a year level on analysis, but you might watch the news and say, the GDP is up 3 points, and the news looks at it like every week almost, but it's hard to get that reporting. You'll see that, you say 2016, what was that before electricity? I mean, this was a few years ago. it's hard to get the numbers all the way back. So we're going to look at a thing called Fred here in a second, where we can actually analyze the current numbers, but usually we look at it by the year. But a lot of places look at the quarter. And by that I mean the growth of the economy. So you might watch the news, and the news might say economy grew 2.6% last quarter. That's GDP growth. So, great questions.
Is it accurate? Like, does it typically affect the real average?
Aha. And that is the question. Is this an accurate reflection of, let me rephrase it maybe. Is it an accurate reflection of well-being and growth? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, yeah, because you said China values things that are of higher quality.
Well,
so even if they make it seems less per person, does it really affect, I guess, the real feel of the average person, how much money they make and how?
Yeah. So let me correct that. I don't know if I said China values things of higher quality. I just said that we value things that are inexpensive. Yeah. But what you're getting at is, I think, the critical criticism of GDP, which is it doesn't include intangible things. It only includes a measurement of certain values. There are some terrible flaws in GDP. So you're getting right to that. Let me talk about the components of GDP so I can get the baseline for all of you guys, and then we'll talk about the flaws, because it doesn't include things like, are you happy, with what you're doing? So different things, intangible things like that. So this is, here are world's largest economy, 2016. COVID has really kind of upended a lot of the analysis. You'll see that in some of your COVID updates in the textbook. But in general terms, I said China is right here in the EU. It's the EU itself did include 2016 the UK and Germany and France. These total would bump this up. This is separated by country. So when I say the EU, I mean the Eurozone. The Eurozone is a free trade zone, except suddenly people in the United Kingdom completely all went on a meth bender or something, decided to vote themselves out of the EU. And what's happened since then is massive devaluation of the British pound, a lot of nasty trade things. A lot of people voted to get out of the EU, and then they're saying, I can't buy my cheese I used to buy from France. Right, it's all taxed now. It's very expensive, and they're upset. And so people say, well, why did you vote to leave the EU? And they said, well, because yeah, but I didn't know it affect my cheese. So it did. So the UK is in a little bit of a jam right now on economic valuation, but regardless, so the chunk of these plus some other countries in the EU. Now, if you've been to Europe, you know the EU is like the United States. You go to Germany, you just pop over to Belgium, you go into France, and you don't have to do passport control, any of that stuff. You just kind of go through the countries like you're going to Alabama or something.
Sorry, that's all.
Now the euro as a currency, only the UK kept the British pound as their own currency, even though they're part of the eurozone. It was a weird deal. But the euro, and I mentioned this before, we were at risk of becoming not the default currency, the reserve currency of the world a little bit ago. What happened was, you know how our Congress critters vote on the budget? And they say, we're going to spend this much money. And then later on, they vote this thing called the debt ceiling. And suddenly people are saying we shouldn't increase the debt ceiling. And just for our sake of discussion, and I will say it's ludicrous to have that conversation in government because they've already spent the money. So it's just like if you have a credit card and you spend it, you go on shopping, you buy a bunch of stuff. You buy $10,000 worth of stuff. Then you get the bill. You can't call the credit card company and say, yeah, I'm not going to pay that. I'm not going to increase my debt ceiling to pay that bill. And the credit card company says, well, I'm going to get creditors and you're going to go bankrupt. You better pay it. U.S. government operates in a similar way. That they budget and then they spend the money, but when the bill comes due, that's increasing the debt ceiling. If they say no, what happens is, one, the Constitution says we always pay our debts. So it's never happened in the history of the country that we said no to pay our debts. So every time there's that debate in the politicians, we're not going to increase the debt ceiling. It's a flawed debate. They've already spent the money. That's just to pay the money, to pay it. They've already spent it. So they can't, if they say no, that's violating one of the fundamental precepts of the Constitution. And what it does, though, is it tells everybody else in the world, we're going to welch on what we owe you. And then the reserve currency isn't the dollar anymore. It becomes the yuan or the euro. It's a very dangerous game that some of our elected people play. It sounds great politically. Like, yeah, they're not going to increase the debt, but they've already increased the debt. That's the thing a lot of people don't realize. They've already spent it. The debt ceiling is not the conversation. The conversation is the budget. Then they say, I don't want to spend that money, was not budgeted. But they do, they soar through it, then it becomes artificial. So when you see the news and people are standing up saying stuff, right, you have to think critically about what the words are and what they're saying. Because they're just, I will get on a tear about this because they can't stand it, because it affects us here. It affects GDP growth, which affects you. So I don't want to putz around with that stuff. It's important that we understand what the real effect is. All right, enough of that business. So GDP growth. The economic growth is the percent change in real per capita GDP. Now, the word real is important here because there is a thing called nominal growth. So first, we're going to get to the calculation, but we're to talk about what this is. Inflation is the growth in overall prices. We know prices change over time because we look at the price level, which is an average price of goods and services in the economy. This is called the basket. You might read about this in your textbook. How we determine this is we look at a basket of things and we say, okay, those things cost a certain amount of money across the country. Now let's look at that basket of things next year and let's see how much that costs next year. And if that has risen, the price level has gone up, then inflation has gone up. And that's how that's a simplified version. There's more detail we'll talk about here coming up. There's also a thing called the Big Mac Index. This was started by the Economist magazine. The Economist magazine is really fantastic. If you want to learn and read, it's kind of like Time, but it's for the world. It's out of England. It's the writing is really top notch. And it's funny, but it's called The Economist, which if you go to your family and say, I want to get a subscription to The Economist, they might think you've been drinking too much, but it's actually very, very good. It's very dense. But if you want to learn about, say, fundamentals of politics happening in India last week, it covers all that stuff. We don't get that exposure a lot of times in the news, but The Economist is really fantastic if you're interested in this kind of stuff. I don't know if we have a free subscription to the library here, but it's well worth it just to take some time to go through it if you're curious. Anyway, it has a editorial-wise, it leans to the right a little bit. I don't want to get into that stuff. The news, though, that it covers is really top-notch. So if you don't like reading editorial stuff, don't read that part. The Wall Street Journal, I have a subscription, but I like the news part of it, or covering companies, for example. Okay, so when prices go up, things go up. That's inflation. And there's a lot of reasons why. And then the deflator of how we calculate real GDP. All right. So here's a critical thing about why I said the word real is important. Nominal GDP, we measure current prices and we say, all right, this coffee was $25. Oh, I hope not. This coffee is $25. It is oat milk though, so maybe I'll pay a premium. Last year it was $10. So the nominal increase in the GDP represented by this cup of coffee is the difference between $25 and $10, which is $15. So we say, okay, that's the current price adjusted, not adjusted for inflation, $15. That's huge. And then we look at the percentage change. But real GDP, we adjust for inflation, and that's the critical thing. So you can see this chart right here, the gap between nominal and real GDP and GDP. So when people are talking about growth rates, it's critical to know if they're talking about real or nominal, because people will fool you. They do it all the time. People have different agendas. So they say, oh, well, look at this. Our growth rate of GDP in Texas is phenomenal, blah, 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 blah. Obviously, because of this, we need to have everybody eating donuts, or whatever the conclusion is. The answer for you, the question for you is, well, is that nominal or real growth? Because if it's nominal, it's artificial. You have to base it on what inflation costs are. And then you can get the baseline. So let's look at how we do that. So first of all, this is nominal growth of GDP at price level, different years. So we're going to find out what the real GDP is. So we take the nominal GDP divided by the price level and we multiply it by 100. The reason we multiply by 100 is we're going to get a decimal or fractional value and we make that into a percentage. So most of you already know all this stuff, so please forgive me if I'm kind of speaking down a little bit, but for those of you who've forgotten, this just means we're making it into a percentage. That's all. Any math stuff, if I go too slow, or if I'm going step by step, and you think this is ridiculous, you moron, just forget it. Because I know some of you aren't comfortable, so I'm trying to bring it to where everyone can kind of get it without saying who's uncomfortable. Raise your hand. So just go with me on it. Okay, so to adjust, we remove the prices, we divide nominal by contemporaneous prices, today's prices, and then we convert. All right, so let's do this. The time is 2018, that's what T stands for. This is table 6.5. So here we are. So in 2018, we take the nominal GDP, the price level of 110, and multiply by 100. So we get, So 2008 real GDP and 2012 prices, $18,000. That's if the important thing is we can now have a comparison between different years and it's legitimate. Again, the whole reason for this is when you're having a discussion with somebody and they say blah, 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 you say, oh, is that real GDP or nominal? For like 90% of the time, it cuts off the conversation because it's, I don't know, I just saw something in a bumper sticker, whatever. Our job is not to do that. Our job is to think a little deeply about what that means and get the relationship. Because once we evaluate that relationship, we see this kind of thing happen. So the average growth rate of GDP per capita, real, between the 1950, really when we start accumulating real information about this, 2012, is 2.03%. So when we say the economy grew at 2%, that's right on line for growth. But all these dips, this terrible, like if you're in medical stuff, this EKG of a patient who is really in bad shape, these periods, and we'll look at here coming up, over time starts to look like this roller coaster. This is a jagged roller coaster right now. I wouldn't want to be on it, but over time, it does that. And that's high growth, and that's recession down at the bottom. Negative GDP growth, which is something we never really want, because people lose wealth and value then, and then positive, huge growth. You can see here, 2008. Before COVID, 2008 was the big one. There's a lot of reasons why 2008 was so nasty. We'll talk about those reasons later on. We know why COVID was bad, because people just stopped working. And I'll show you something here about that coming up.
I have a question.
Yes?
Can we do an equation where we take the information from the graph and plug it in? So if we have to look at the graph and then not
Yeah, you want to do an example?
Yeah.
Well, why don't we do an example? Let's just do this right now. We'll calculate growth over time, and maybe this will answer that question. Then we can look at that on a graph. Okay, so this is growth. This is the growth formula. So growth, all this business just means economists want to be physicists. And so, you have your denominator, or your let's just call it letters. Growth of t plus 1. T is time. T plus 1 in this case is the year plus 1 year. Make it really simple. So here, y, and y, which is our growth rate, which means, and it's what I've said before, all you have to know about calculating growth is what you have minus what you had in the past divided by what you had. We multiply by 100. So let's do that. So the growth rate change between the dates. So here, I'll just give our per capita in 2009 constant dollars. Sometimes you might see a number that shifts between a percentage point or one on different data points. But remember, the aggregate is what we're talking about. So don't get too hung up on individual details like that. So I want to look at the growth rate between 2006 and 2007. I hope this might answer your question. So between 2006 and 2007, we know real GDP was 48,000 to 51,000. So per capita just means superficially, oh, people are making, Siri is excited about that. Per capita. So people make $51,000 a year on average throughout the entire United States. Remember, on average, the median. So that includes Bill Gates, and that includes my son, who, well, I don't know what he ate a lot of cereal. So on average, right? So what we do is we take what you have, so 51,000, minus what you had, divided by what you had, with 0.68, and then you multiply by 100, which gives us 6.8% increase in growth. So same thing 2007 and 2008. And remember, this is T and T plus 1. It could be T and T plus 5. So you can go 5 years compared to the other year. It's the same formula. So here 2008, 2009, and 2010. So on the face of it, okay, well, we went to 48,000 from 51,000. How do we calculate the growth there? Well, the same thing here, but now it's negative 5.2%. What you have minus what you had divided by what you had. That's all you got to do. And then you multiply by 100 to get the percentage. It's fairly straightforward. And then what we can do then is say, okay, now I can graph these growth rates and then see, and then the average between 6.8, 5.2, and 1.7, that's just a 3-year span, but that would give us, if we do that span over 50 years, that gets us a 2%. Pretty good so far? Okay. But here's a secret. And of anything, of all things, to take away from this class, it's going to be this stuff. Because you'll later on, when you're old and sitting in your rocking chair on your ranch land looking out over your fields of alfalfa, because we don't eat meat anymore and there are no more glaciers, you're going to say, you know, I remember at Emerald College economics, and that's why I'm the wealthy person I am today, because of this one thing that happened on Wednesday.
Put us in your wheel.
I put it in my will. Yes, that's right. Where there's a will, there is a relative. This is going to be the critical thing to remember. And it's not about GDP, it's about you and your wealth. And it's about exponential growth. The key to everything is exponential growth. And by that I mean, things can grow at a constant rate, but you can compound stuff. And if you've done some accounting classes, you know what compounding means. We're going to talk a little bit about it. So if you have $1,000, you put it into a savings account for 10 years, you earn interest of 3% a year, how much do you have at the end of the 10th year? So it's a pretty simple calculation. You don't have to do it. But I want to show you how people will do it the wrong way, and then how people do it the right way. And the right way is where you make your money. And this affects countries as well. So this is with no compounding. $1,000, you end up with $1,300, 3% a year. You say 3%, 3%, 3%, 3%. But compounding means 3%, but then you add 3% on that, and 3% on that. It's not the first value. So it compounds your interest over time. Okay, so pretty easy. You end up with $43 more, $44 more in 10 years, compounded at 3%. Hmm?
And 90 cents.
Yeah. Not too exciting, right? $43.90 more. But it gets really exciting when you figure out, well, that drives in an exponential way. So the graph doesn't do this. The graph does this. And this curve is what I'm interested in. So that's a small, tiny change. It leads to a big difference. And I want to tell you about this story. You might have heard this before. So there's this king. Love playing chess. I love playing chess. I defeat all my foes in chess, except for when I lose, which is always. So one time, this person I worked with said, how many moves ahead do you think in chess? And I said, oh, just one, but it is always the correct one. And he wouldn't play me after that. Chess is just intimidation. I think if anyone actually played me, they would see how bad I am. I should not record that on video. So,
Wow.
okay. So Bobby Fischer, an insane person, but also a great chess player. You've heard the story of Bobby Fischer, you know him, but there's a movie called Searching for Bobby Fischer. And Bobby Fischer would go to a chess match. This was in the height of the Cold War, the United States, Soviet Union, and chess was the sport that really was the dynamic thing between them. And Bobby Fischer was playing Boris Spassky, and it was drama and tension. But Bobby Fischer would show up to a chess match 20 minutes early and just stare at the chessboard. So his opponent would show up, and in one match, the opponent just put the king down and said, I lose, you already figured out the whole game. And the guy ran away and left. He was nervous, he was sweating. Bobby Fischer just sat there. That's what chess kind of is. So, game of chess. There are 64 squares on a chessboard. So there's this king, he says, hey, you wise guy, wise man, if you can beat me in a game of chess, then you can get anything you want. And the sage guy says, okay, I want some rice. And for all the squares on the chessboard, I want 1 grain of rice, then 2, and then 4. So you just double it for every grain, for every square. Okay, so the king took him up on it. So how much do you think the guy had at the end? The sage wins. And how much do you think he got from the king?
Over a million.
Mm-hmm. It was quite a bit. It was a lot. Yeah. So that's how much. So that's a lot. So we go 100,000, a million, a billion, a trillion metric tons. That's more than the weight of Mount Everest. In the story, the sage ends poorly. The king says, ha, and he kills him. But, I mean, that's not really the moral.
That's
So,
sad.
but what about if I did the same thing? I said, if you want to bet with me, and I said, okay, I'll pay you. I'll pay you $50,000 right now, or a penny every day doubled for 30 days. What would you take? And I mean, it's $50,000 in cash right now. You don't have to wait 30 days.
In the end, the penny is making more profit.
You think so?
Oh yeah, I'll put my money on the table.
So you're going to give up $50,000 in cold, hard, okay, American, probably counterfeit cash, but still, you're going to give that up for a penny?
Yeah,
My shoes.
in the long run.
In the long run, the long run is only 30 days.
No.
No?
Think about it with me.
50,000. Show us the math. Okay, you do the math in your
It's a
head.
trick question.
No,
It's simple.
simple question. $100,000. $100,000.
Just to get 2 pennies a day.
Well, it's 1 penny a day, 2 pennies tomorrow, 4 pennies the next day.
That's way less
Take
than
the
the
pennies
$30,000.
and tell me you put it
So what would you take?
I would take the
You
$50,000.
take the
No.
50.
I'll take
No,
the
I
pennies.
take the penny.
Take the
All right,
pennies.
there we go. We got 2 pennies.
$50,000.
Okay, so a penny doubled every day for 30 days gets you that much.
There we go. Then you let's go.
That's more, right? Yeah, but you're dead at the end of the 30 days. 'cause you
Yeah,
don't have penny
it's
to-
$5 million.
Oh.
Yeah. That's more, I hope.
Okay.
Did I put that decimal in the wrong place? $5 million. This is the power of compounding over time. Now, in this case, it's 1 penny doubled. So if you got a compounded interest rate that doubled every day, that's awesome. If you got $1 today and 2 tomorrow and 4 and then 8 and 16, that's pretty good. And just $1, okay, so take this, that was 1 penny. So 1 penny is 1/100th of a dollar. So you multiply this by 100, so $500 million. So if I did $1 a day. So compounding is critical. Now, in countries, it works like this. three countries, A, B, and C. So the GDP, the growth rate is 0%, country B is 1%, and country C is 2%. So the calculation, growth over time, country A has a GDP of $1,000 and started at $1,000, 0% growth. This is at 1810. So that's the growth rate from 1810 to 2010. So that's in 2010 up here. I think it should be, yes, there it is. Okay. Country B, $7,000 per capita. And country C, $52,000 per capita, based on just 1% difference in growth rate. So Abraham Lincoln, Benjamin Franklin put some money away in Philadelphia. Benjamin Franklin, he's on money. Yeah, so, but he's not a president. I don't think politicians should be on money. I think you should have like Stephen Hawking on money. That'd be great. Because, money is like a black hole. It just disappears. That's a physics joke. Nothing? Nobody in here? Stephen Hawking, black holes? Nothing? Okay. Hawking radiation? Nobody? Yeah, cheers.
That was gonna say something.
Don't get me started on quantum computing and entanglement because it's really, really awesome. But we'll use a real math on that. So, okay. Benjamin Franklin put some money away and said, this is for the city of Philadelphia in 200 years. It just came up in a little more than 200 years. It just came up a couple of years ago. And it's so much money now. I can't remember the number. But now there are all these lawsuits going on. City of Philadelphia wants it. These other people, they want Benjamin Franklin's money that has compounded over time, just sitting in a bank. It's millions and millions and millions of dollars. So why is this important? Well, for you, and we can get into how you should, really the smartest way over time to invest. Some of you, we talk about crypto, we talk about getting into stuff. You can do all that kind of stuff. But the best thing for normal humans that you don't want to pay attention to ever that has happened has been the no-load index mutual fund. And by that I mean people, you can put money into the stock market but not have to buy individual stocks for a little bit over time, called dollar cost averaging, and doing that follows this trajectory of your investment. And I'm not kidding. So if you start young and you just invest a little bit over time in this thing called the no-load index mutual fund, which no-load means you don't pay any money going into it. And an index fund indexes the market, it just matches the market. There's the S&P 500, there's a Wilshire index fund, all sorts of stuff. And if you want to know more specifics, we can get into that stuff. But my son had a summer job when he was 14, and he just started putting money in. Now he's 19, and he has quadrupled his money already because the stock market's gone really well, but the stock market hasn't gone up 4 times. But he puts in money every month, a little bit like $50 a month, and then and the dividends from the stocks he reinvests, and that's the compounding. And as he reinvests his dividends, the growth rate just goes up, and soon it will just go up like that. And he'll end up retiring probably with the trajectory $20 million.
Oh, what?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when do you sell? You say
Depends on your motivation. So if you're I'm about, when you're young, plan for your retirement, because you don't know what's going to happen, and don't plan on a social safety net. It might happen, it might be there, but I wouldn't plan on it because that's out of your control. So if Social Security is there, okay, and if it isn't, you're still planning on you're planning on just yourself. So to sell at that point, I would put it into a 401k and it's tax deferred and wait till you retire and just see that. Now, if you have other plans, then you dollar cost average on the investment and you dollar cost average on the sale to mitigate your loss. Dollar cost average just means you put in money at a certain time every month. So if the stock market is here, you're putting it here. If it's here, you're putting it here. Over time, you'll win by not having to try to figure out the dynamics. You cannot outtrade. If you're a day trader, you want to do that stuff? Okay. But you cannot beat the people who spent $3 billion on a fiber optic line between Boston and New York to outbid you by a fraction of a second.
So you said the estimate.
It depends. There's S&P mutual funds, the index funds. There's a Wilshire 1000 index fund. There's a Wilshire 5000 index fund. The other thing too about this stuff is fees. When you're investing, you pay fees. If you trade a lot, you pay a lot of fees. Crypto is a little different. Fees are slightly lower, but you're still paying some. You have to pay somebody in the middle. No load index funds have fees, but they're really low because you're not trading all the time. You're just matching the index. So you don't. So the money that you pay out of your stuff, you want to limit those fees. Now there are a lot of specifics in there if you guys are curious about it. But all I'm saying today is, if you want to have long-term growth, look at compounding and look at compounding rates of return, and you'll start to see the growth do this. There are two rules though. The biggest rule is don't look. Don't look. Put your money in and just keep doing it every month, a little bit if you can. Now I know some of you are saying, I can't do anything every month. I can barely get out of bed every month. But if you're able to put in $20 a month or $50 or whatever, do it. You will be amazed. And if you'll believe me, you'll be amazed what happens. You don't have to run a company. You don't have to buy a company and sell a company. You just have that. It will be incredible what happens. Really. Over time, you can't beat the market. But you will see things like this happen. Like 2008. It's a terrible time for the market. The market right now could be, arguably, it's overvalued. And some people are saying, the market's going to lose 50% of its value. Okay, that might happen. But when that happens, just keep dollar cost averaging, because your dividends will make up for that over time. You'll keep going up. Now, if you're 75 years old and you're thinking, wait a minute, I just need to get some money out because I just want to have my farm life, that's a different conversation. But I'm talking about over time growth. So it mimics this. So here we have economic growth across nations. You can see a lot of success that people are having. So in Iberia here, in Poland, you see a lot of growth coming out of countries that are used to be old Eastern European Soviet bloc countries. So the Czech Republic is a great example. Albania is a great example. So once they move from the planned economy in the Soviet state to like more of an open economy, the growth rate kind of goes like this. Really, what that means is you give people opportunity to build things. Okay, so the business cycle, we talked about that before. It kind of looks like this. This is the short run. So we got these peaks. So, but that line, the long-term expansion, that's what this is right here. Okay, these are the business peaks and cycles of the economy over time. It's kind of hard to see what's going on, but you'll see that unemployment, we're going to talk more about unemployment. Unemployment rates match the steady GDP growth, they're just inverted. So high unemployment when you have negative GDP, and it just, you fold the two graphs and it matches. And that makes sense. If you have no growth, people lose jobs. So GDP measures these things that we talked about, but we got to figure out what GDP is. And I'm going to go blow through this so I can get to the definitions for you because we're going to run out of time. Just remember though that I talked about final goods. GDP covers final goods. There are intermediate goods. That's repackaging and bundling. That's not included in GDP. It's only the final good. So if you have many, many processes that go into a tire, like rubber and all these things like that, it's just the tire that counts. Now, that also means, though, that a car is included in GDP as the final good, even though there's some stuff that comes in, imported and exported into the car. Okay. So let's look at components. There are different components, and this is another critical thing. How we calculate GDP. One is consumption. So that's how much we spend on goods and services by households. So GDP doesn't care if it's an apple or an apple. So Q, Blue Apple, 1984, and of course delicious. So it doesn't matter. It's what we consume. So there are things called durable goods, non-durable goods. Durable goods, a washing machine is a durable good. It lasts for a certain period of time. And non-durable good, like you're going to get some socks.
And then you have to once every. So non-durable goods are like basically are expire or something like that.
Yeah, it could be food that expires. It could be, like I said, a pair of socks you can wear and then it will kind of
And
wear
it
them
runs
out.
out.
Yeah, but a durable good like a refrigerator, you might want to keep for a long. You don't want to buy a refrigerator every year.
And your car,
The car's a durable good, right? Mhm. So another part of this calculation is investment. So that's how much we expend on other capital goods. So you're buying a factory, you're buying a warehouse, you're buying other stuff, inventory. So that's your investment in that business. And then government spending. So that's a big one. That does include things like Social Security. It's called a transfer program that transfers from one bucket of money to the next. I was so proud of myself because I thought, hey, look, I put Iron Man there. But then somebody corrected me, that is not Iron Man, that is War Machine. And I'm humiliated because I thought I knew dorky stuff.
Well, Jordan did find him, so it's still right.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I appreciate that support because that's my whole point, right? So,
He's actually part of the military, so it's better representation.
Right.
I guess that's true because Iron Man was a private thing, right? Well, now I'm feeling good about myself. I appreciate you guys. I think I'm going out on a high note. We'll just stop there. And for the rest of your life, you think GDP is only made up of consumer, investment, and government. That's it. And I will rip you off. So we'll do the next ones. Exports. We denote that by these letters, by the way. So it's important that government spending is a G, investments an I, and consumption is a C, and exports an X. And then imports is an M, not an I, because that confuses with investment. So imports, that's bringing stuff, goods and services from abroad. So this is the calculations called aggregate demand. It's also seen as Y. Y equals this, or GDP equals consumption plus investment plus government spending plus exports minus imports. So it's pretty simple. If we can see here that in most countries, aggregate demand is the largest share, consumption is the largest share of GDP. So in the US, we consume quite a bit. China, but that's a huge differentiation right there. You can see the difference on 68% versus 37%. Investment, though, and this is a very big number, because up until just 2 years ago, the United States was the #1 patent filing country in all the world. 2 years ago, China became #1 on patent filings. So when people say the Chinese just copy, that is not true. It is not a reductive strategy for them. It's invention. And so they're putting all that money into investment. And you can see our imports and exports differentiation too. So same thing here, total expenditure. It's a different look at the same information, but percentage of GDP, 68%. I'll go back to the first screen here. You can see 68.4% on consumption. This one's 68.1. That's what I mean. Some of the numbers might be a little upside down depending on the year. Don't get too hung up on that. So in our last 2 minutes, we get to the most important question: what are the shortcomings? It doesn't value non-market goods, the underground economy, leisure, happiness. If you hire a babysitter and you pay that person in cash, it doesn't count. If you do some illicit activity, illegal drugs, it doesn't count. A lot of different things, like here, people pay cash all the time, doesn't count in GDP. Underground, and then of course environmental quality not included. That's why people can pollute, because it's not a calculation, and that gets to a whole conversation we'll have later on about what the value of public space is and how we value that as economists. Doesn't calculate leisure, so only labor. So here we have the average work week of different places, and of course, no wonder why people, the top happy countries, Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, because they're just partying all the time. They're not.
Sweden run off like a 4-day work week.
What was the question? The
Doesn't
first.
Sweden run off like a 4-day work week? It's like they don't work. Nobody works over 30 hours.
Yeah. Well, that, and they have your vacation is like 2 months or whatever. So, yeah. So you might think, yeah, but Sweden doesn't have the economy the United States has. That gets to the question, what do we measure? Because if they're so happy, does it matter? So this gets into a lot of the flaws of GDP and why people do certain things they do. And it gets to the whole 4-day work week and the measurement of that. And some companies, even the US, are now testing this. And a lot of them are having great success. The company I used to work with, though, was inverted. You would have to come in Saturday morning from 8 to noon to work. And what that meant was people would stand around and eat donuts and yak. And they would have to have babysitters to watch their kids on Saturday morning. So it was a push downward on GDP because babysitting doesn't count. So you think you're adding a lot of value, but really it was just making people miserable. One of the people actually just died this past week. It was an old executive, and the funeral was this past Saturday. And I told people, yeah, there he is, forcing you to work on a Saturday holiday one last time. So. Sorry, Bob. if you're watching this live stream from wherever you are, and you know it's pretty warm there. All right. We're going to stop there because I'm just going to keep going in a bad place. So bring questions on Monday because we're down a day for the week. So please bring questions. We've got to cover more stuff next week. And then we'll do another review for the exam. I hope some of you, we reviewed some of those questions. You guys got them wrong. So we'll do another review coming up.
I was going to ask about what you think a good study topic is. Because I read the book, did the questions on the PowerPoint slides, took my own notes from the book, and did the inquisitive before the test, and I still didn't do very well. So.
Okay. So let me get out of here.
I just have a question. Do you think we could set up a time where you can show me how, like, I have some money that I want to invest, but I have no idea